Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hiram, or some call me Bogwa. Today we'll be continuing with the front-end development series. Last time I created a tutorial showing you how to deploy your first front-end application to Git pages, and we're gonna continue with that. The goal with this is to walk you through the process of developing a front-end app, just utilizing the basics, not getting complicated. So this is starting from like just the core of front-end development using the HTML page, a style sheet, and maybe get into some JavaScript. We're going to be converting my Git page from a simple hello world application into a portfolio application. Follow along to help you build a portfolio front-end app for yourself where you can track the different projects that you work on. So with that, this is currently what I have. If you go to coderush-io.github.io, you don't always have to type the /index.html, but sometimes Git pages takes a while to update, so I'll just go straight to the page. That'll refresh it quicker. Also follow me on GitHub if you don't. This is my page, coderush-io, and there you can fork this repo, clone the code if you want. So with that, this is what I have. I've added a few things since the last tutorial that I had. I created this style.css file to store my CSS code. So CSS is what we use to style a web page. HTML more so defines the structure of the website. And inside that HTML file, I've linked that style sheet using this link tag. So that's how you link the style that you have for your specific page. I've also added 2 images. I'm going to use sort of like my profile picture. Couldn't decide. We'll see which one I go with. So let's get started. Now in HTML, we have what's called a class, but we also have what's called an ID. Now, so let's do ID. Class. Now, the purpose of the class and the ID is to help us with styling our page. So this is to mark this component that I've added here. Now, the difference between an ID and a class, as you can maybe guess, an ID is used for unique components. So I can only use this ID once. And then the class, I can use it, let's say if I want to create another duplicate div that also has the same style, I'll use a class. If it's shared style with different components, you use a class. If it's sort of like just one unique component, you just use an ID. Typically for divs, you find that we mostly use ID classes, not IDs. So let me kind of show you. H1 div. I want to show you what a div is and how it works. But before that, let me show you how we utilize this class. So for the class, whenever the difference between the class and the ID. So for the class, we do the dot and then the class name, and then here we can say background color blue. That's how we style a class component. And let's give it a margin 5 pixels. So we're saying that's a margin of 5 pixels. For the ID, we style it differently. Note, I'll use the pound or hashtag sign, and then here I can do background color red. And then now if I go and refresh my page, let's see, that's what I'll have. So that's the main difference between a class and a ID. Get rid of that. And then the divs, the divs stack on top of each other. You can think of them as they're more so used for containers to stack on top of each other. So you're building building blocks of components. So I'll remove that. I'll remove this. And the first component that I'm gonna start by creating is sort of our portfolio header project or header component. This will be the first component that we work on today, and it's gonna include an image, sort of like I'm thinking about creating something that has like kind of like a profile image, and then it has a little description, sort of like your name, describing what this portfolio contains, or saying something small about yourself. So I'll call this instead of calling it a container. So one thing, whenever you're writing code, whenever you're designing a component, always use descriptive naming. So here I'll have a container. I think I'm going to use that to wrap my entire body. But then I'll have this div inside there. And I know you can nest them. And I'll give it a class of portfolio header. And then in there, I'll create another div. And I'll give it a class portfolio image. And I have another one, a class portfolio description. And then in here we link that image. So in HTML we have the image tag, that's img, and note how I close off my tags. So for the div, I open it here and I close it here. That's how we close off our tags. But there are some tags that are self-closing. So I define image and note what I have here. The backslash and then the caret to close it. And then from there I can define source, images, code-png. Then I'll give this an ID. Since there's only one image, I'll give it an ID. No, any component in HTML can be given an ID or a class. So I'll give this an ID of portfolio image, and I'll change this to portfolio image wrapper. And then we can go here. Portfolio image, I'll give it a width 200 pixels, height 200 pixels. Whenever we're using our height, width, our sizes, we use pixels or percentages. There are other units out there, but to start off with the basics, we'll use pixels and percentages. And let's refresh the page and see. And there it is, the image. Now here for the description, I'll just do something small. I'll use the P tag, so that's the paragraph tag. And I'll say, this is my profile description. There you go. Now one thing I kind of do whenever I'm creating these projects is kind of try and think about like how I want the end product to look like, and I'm sort of like writing this code based on that. Now typically if you're working in a company, unless you're more on the designer side of things, most of the times, you know, I think most of the times, based on my experience that I've had, there's already a predefined sort of like standard to follow for the design, so you won't have to come up with the design yourself. Because I know there's some people who it's easier to create something that there's a template for than it is to kind of like create it out of nothing. But in this instance, we're going to create it out of nothing. And hopefully that will create a template for you that you can kind of like follow along with. So I want to utilize this style that I had created here, but first let me fix this container. So I have this container class that wraps up everything. So what I'm gonna do is with that container class, I'm gonna give it a style. I'm gonna say width. We're gonna give it a max width. I'm gonna say 1024 pixel. Margin auto. That automatically. So let's right click and inspect. And this is something you should get familiar with, just inspecting and kind of viewing your page on here. So as you can see, I've given the container, and Chrome is really good at this, where as you can see it highlights. Firefox also does this, and so does IE, but I don't know who uses IE anymore. To kind of like highlight and show you the breakdown. So the max width 1024, and let's see if we remove that. As you can see, the blue is where we cover, so that container covers the entire width. But if I do that, I kind of like limit how long it is, so my content will fall between the CodeRush image and all the way the entire blue section. So let's go back. The next thing is I want to add some padding at the top. So I can add margin at the top, but I like to add padding. So the difference between margin and padding is margin adds the space outside of your container. Padding adds the space inside your container. So let's check it out. Let's actually go back to Chrome and view it from there. So if we go to the container, let's just do padding top. Let's do 5%. And as you see there's that green on top. So our container has just added occupied space inside the container itself. But now let's see if we were to do margin top 5%. As you see, it's the same thing, kind of like the margin auto. It's kind of like that orange. So it's just pushed our container down from where it starts. But padding, it's within the container that's added that space. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to utilize the padding. I'm going to do padding top 5%. That's good. The next thing I want to do is I want the description to be on the side. I don't want it to be here. Well, first let me add. So let's see, portfolio wrapper and portfolio description. Let me add a border. Portfolio image wrapper and portfolio description. I'm gonna add a border, 1 pixel, solid. Now, if you're new to this, you would ask me, how do I get to learn, like, how do I remember all these properties for CSS to use? Because it can be overwhelming at first. One thing I would recommend is whenever you're creating something, you have an idea of what you want to do. With time, you'll come to pick them all up and understand how to utilize each one of them. But whenever you're learning, you can just Google. You can look up, because you know CSS is for styling. So you can be like CSS add width. or not width. Let's see, CSS add background color. And this is one of the most useful websites that you can use, W3 Schools. And in here, it will show you exactly the CSS that you need to utilize. And there's a lot of it for text, fonts, links, list. But don't be overwhelmed by that. That's just, something that you can utilize. But for now, just follow along with what I'm doing. And again, down the road, I'll cover CSS more in depth. But for now, it's just kind of walking you through the process of building a portfolio page. So now, as you can see, there's a border, and you can see how they've stacked on each other. The two divs have stacked on each other. Now, the end results, the way I want this to be, I want this to take up like 25% of that, and then the description, I want it to come here and take up the other 25%. So now you will utilize CSS to kind of like modify that. So let's go to CSS. We have the portfolio image wrapper. Now here, as you will see, we have shared CSS here above. This CSS over here is shared. So I've pretty much just utilized the class portfolio image wrapper, comma, portfolio description. And then I've added the style. But now I want to separate them out because each one of them, this CSS will apply to each one of them separately. So the image wrapper, I wanted to take up with 25%. And then I want the portfolio description to take up with 75%. Now, as you can see, that width adds up to be 100, and that is the goal. And then after that, let's save it and let's see what we get. Now, as you can see, we got a width of 25% and a width of 75% of the entire container. Now we can let's add the border also to the container. That way you can see. There it is. And as you can see, the container goes all the way up because it's a padding and not a margin. Let me just demo that to you again. So instead of padding top, let's do margin top 5%. So as you can see, it pushes the container down. But the padding, you see the top border is still up there. But as you can see now, the next thing we want to do is we want to get this description on the right side of the image. So in order to do that, we're going to say float left. Actually, let's see. Now, as you can see, the description has floated to the left of the image. And now what's happened is the image now is floating. It's only taking up this width, but since it's floating, the height of the container kind of like moves up. It's only accounting for the description height. And this is just something that comes with like learning CSS over time. But now, as you can see, the width here is 75. So now the next thing we want to do is we actually want to let's make our portfolio description the full width, because instead of 75 and that, it's an easy way of doing that. Let's make it 100%. contain a border. And then let's give both the image and the portfolio description an equal height. So whenever we want to give it an equal height, we want to use pixels. Let's just give it a height of 350 pixels. Now that's height that's longer than the image itself. So now it kind of like takes up the whole space. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to style the portfolio image. I have the ID portfolio image. I've already given it a width of 200 by 200. And the next thing I want to do is let me give it a border radius of 200 pixels. Voila, we have that image look. And then the next thing is I like to utilize the Chrome sort of like inspection toolkit to kind of like play around with the CSS as I work. And we just do margin, auto, maybe margin. Let's see. We'll do text align, center. So that aligns our image. So we'll take that property, go back to our code, and that's the for the portfolio image wrapper. We'll add that on there. It's gonna align our image in the center. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a little. I'd want to add a little padding here on the top. So I think just kind of like lower it a little bit. So there I can do padding. Do 5%. Now, if you do that padding, note what happens. It's gonna add the padding on all sides. Now let's see if we do 5%, 0%. It's gonna add the padding, the 5% on the top, and then the 0 on the sides. Now let's say if we switch it up, 0 on 5%, and that does the opposite where he adds them on the side. Yeah, so that's a different way of utilizing that property. And again, you can go to W3 Schools. Look up the CSS property, padding, and they'll show you. There's padding top, right, bottom, left, and also padding by itself. They kind of gives you the description. So, but I think what I want is I want padding top to be 2.5%. Yep, and I'll take that. I'll add that to my code. And if we go back and refresh, there it is. So the next thing is I want to design this description to be a little bit better. I want to include, like, you know, name, job title, portfolio description. So the image, I like what I have so far, so I'm gonna leave that to be. The description, I'll remove this. So kind of like the way I see it as like different divs containing that are stacked on each other, each containing the label description and the whatever I'm adding on there to the side. So I'll call this description wrapper, and then there. I can add a label. That could be name. And then I can use what's called a span. And then I'll add Jogu. So now let's see. There it is. So we have the label, and then we have the name. Now, what's the difference between? So the thing to note, the difference between a span and a div is spans do not stack. They're inline. So if we do that, I'll show you. They're inline. But now if we change it to be a div, they stack. That's the major difference. So in this case, I'll use a span for my name. Now I'll use the same pattern, but in the meantime, let me give this a class. Actually, I don't have to, but let me just leave that as like that. So I have the name, current title. I'll just say software developer. Full stack software developer, and then in here I'll add a bigger description. I'll say more of like, who am I? So there, as you can see. So the next thing I want to do is I want to bump them up and style the main components, main tags over here. And then I feel like for the description, I'd want it to come below, and then I'd want to put break. I add a little bit more space between the title, the name title, and sort of like the little description that I have of myself. And with that, I'll actually take out the who am I, and I'll just leave it like that, description wrapper. So let's first start by styling the description wrapper. Again, it's a class. So we'll start with the dot, and then I'll give it a padding 2.5%. That's a little too much. 0.5%. Okay, I like that. And then let's do margin left 5%. So now we can hover over this to see what's going on here. How come it's not adding? So now, as we can see clearly, it stretches all the way through. So that's why whenever he adds a padding on this side, it's like over here. It's not, they're not as stacked. And I think that has to do with the float left. I need to find a better way of doing that. I think you can do position, absolute, fixed, relative, and then this, and like float, left. So a lot of this is just playing around and seeing. So let's do 75%. I'll go back to what I had with float left. Okay. Okay, I needed to apply the float left to both of them. Sometimes, you know, even with experience, you still need to look up certain properties. And that's something actually key to know. You'll never know everything, but you have to know how to utilize the tools that you have to create the end product that you want. Part of the job as a developer is to figure things out, and that's key. So let's just apply the float left to both. Okay, now we see the width is, it's 100%. Let's change that to 75%. Which this is interesting. So this is width is 25%, and this is width 75%. So shouldn't they be side by side? How come they're not? And I'll tell you why. That's because we've reached, so 25 plus 75 is 100. But for the border, we've added this one extra pixel, and that pushes that aside. So if we remove the border, then it's gonna adjust it. So you also have to kind of like know your little bit of the basic math of addition, to kind of like figure out styling and making sure things align. The other thing is I also want to add this padding top to the description, or let me find the way it is. No, I think I'll add it to both. So I'll check it out from here. Add it in there. I'm actually gonna take, if you're not following me on Instagram, go ahead and follow my page. This is a post that I created, just sharing something about me that you guys can kind of like, just, you know, kind of share a little bit of who I am. I'll just copy that description. Yes, I'm being lazy right now. And I'll add that. There you go. Did not transfer my emojis. So I'll remove that. Okay, so the next thing is I want to give the label. I want them to be a little bit bold. So I'll go in here, description wrapper. So in here I should be able to do label. Description wrapper. font weight bold. That's how you make it bold. So now I refresh, name and title are bold, and then we give them an equal width of let's do 150 pixels. See how that comes out. Does not apply the width to the just leave that at that. And then here we do profile. I'll add another class. So note you can have multiple classes for one component. So I have the description wrapper, and that's shared between all three. But I've also added the profile description, and that's for that description itself. So I'll do profile description. I'll do margin top 0.5. Let's do 1.5%. And there you go. And you have sort of like our basic profile layout. And this is a nice start for updating our profile page. And we'll continue with this series and we'll add more. So below, the next thing we'll do in the series is we'll have the projects somewhere here below. But for now, this is a good start and getting hands-on with HTML and CSS. Now again, the goal I was hoping with this project is right now you're able to understand HTML components, understand CSS. Don't worry too much about the different properties. At one point I'll have a CSS tutorial where I get a little bit more in depth into that, but for now it's kind of like understanding the basics of HTML and also kind of like seeing how I go about the process of creating a new page from scratch without using any templates or anything like that, and learning sort of like the different tags, span, div, label, also understanding the difference between a class and an ID, and also utilizing something like an image tag, linking your style sheet, your CSS from an outside file, the style.css, into your HTML page. So let's actually add one more thing. I had this card 1 and card 2, and I said I'll show you what it's about. So we'll go ahead in the portfolio header. We'll add that class, card 1. Hold on. Curious why it's not working. Box shadow. We have the class card 1. Let's inspect. Okay, so it's there. Let's try card 2 and see. Okay, I'll show you. Height 100%. So if you look at the card one, it doesn't have any height and doesn't have any width, and that's because of, so let's see, if we remove the float, there it is. So the float is causing our divs to kind of like realign. So let's see, let's run with that. So this is overflow auto. So what's happening, if I can explain that, is since the divs are overflowing and they don't there's a float and they don't have like a specific height, they're sort of overflowing from the card wrapper. So it's saying, hey, like this is like beyond, you know, the given height and width. So let's try and give it a width 100%. Still doesn't work. But if you say overflow, it's gonna say, hey, the content that's overflowing will be covered by that. So we'll just add that overflow. Actually, we're gonna add it to the portfolio header, not the card one. So portfolio header. Yeah, we utilize that. And there it is. That's good. Here, maybe actually I like the way it is. Here for description wrapper, let's see if I add the text. Text online. Justify. Yep. Then that kind of makes sure it's equal. And then for the description wrapper, I do a padding right too of 5%. That looks better. And then this height's a little too long. I think I have it hard coded as 350 pixels. So let's see what happens if I remove the 350 pixels. Automatically, it's gonna adjust to that. And then let's see if I'll add a padding bottom too. 2.5 pixels. There you go, much better. So this is kind of like the main portfolio page. And with that, let's clean up some of these changes. Just to wrap things up, we have our link where we're linking the style sheet. We have our, I'll collapse everything. We have our main container. Okay, Git. We have our main container, which contains the entire body. And that's what we use to kind of like define like, hey, this page will align from this corner to this corner, and ignore anything extra beyond that, and then center everything in there. And then in there, I've defined the header. This contains the description, the profile description. So it has 1, the image, and 2, sort of like the profile description. So for the image, we use the image tag, which we link to the image using source, and we have this folder, and we give it an ID of portfolio image. Now note, for the ID, we use the pound or hashtag, and for the class we use the dot. So after that, we have the profile description, which that's using the description wrapper, and that wraps every single one of this description. So that would be like 1, 2, and this would be 3. And in each description we have a label, and we use a span to make sure they're displayed on the same line. That describes is just a name, and then I have, so the label name, and then I have my name. And this can be utilized now, as you see, for multiple things. So let's say I wanted to add another description. I can just like literally just copy paste that, and then give it a new label and a new name. And then I have my description wrapper. That's for the next one, for the title. And this one, where I just basically just remove the label. I don't need a label for that. And I give it another class. Note, you can give multiple classes, and it's the same thing with ID. You just need to space it out. And I've also given a different class for that, for this specific component. And with that, I'll go ahead and push it up to Git. So terminal, new terminal. Now do Git status, Git add, Git commit, and I'll say design page header or portfolio header. Then I'll push that up. With that, everything looks good. I refresh my GitHub page. Those changes are up. So let's see if they've taken effect. Not yet. Let's do new incognito. Let's see what's going on with the okay, so the CSS hasn't taken effect, and now it has. And this is interesting because you can see the page before the CSS is applied. So I refreshed it, and that CSS. So again, you can Control U, click on that file, and you'll open up the CSS, and you can see the CSS code that I pushed up. Same thing with the HTML. You can view the HTML. Now if I refresh this page, now that the CSS is updated, it'll look good. I thought it would. Okay, I'll just wait for it to take effect, but in the meantime, that code is pushed up. You can check it out on my repo. Again, that's the coderush-io.github.io. I'll put the link in the description. And that's a wrap. And if you have not yet, subscribe to my channel and keep an eye out for more as we continue building out this portfolio page.